Good afternoon, everybody. My colleague John Kirby from the NSC is going to come up and share some words and take some questions.
Afternoon, everybody.
And I had a quick follow-up on the Chinese spy balloon. This idea that President Xi Jinping may not have been aware of the order to send this balloon over U.S. soil, what would that tell you if that were true about his grip on his own government? Is it possible that it suggests a kind of power breakdown? Is it surprising to the U.S.?
We certainly can't confirm these reports about President Xi's personal knowledge of that, and I would refer you to the PRC to speak to their own leadership issues and information sharing. What matters to us is that this was a violation of our sovereign airspace, and clearly with intent. Now, whose intent? I don't think we have a perfect picture of that right now. Clearly, without question, the intent of the PRC, because we know that this balloon belonged to them. And President Biden acted decisively in support of our national sovereignty.
But our reporting is that U.S. officials briefing lawmakers this week told lawmakers that this is the U.S. intelligence community's
I'm not going to speak
assessment,
to
right?
intelligence assessments from the podium.
We gotta keep going. Go ahead, John. But really briefly, can you speak to rumors that there is another Chinese balloon above Alaska or any other parts of U.S. territory that the U.S. shot down?
So I can confirm that the Department of Defense was tracking a high-altitude object over Alaska airspace in the last 24 hours. The object was flying at an altitude of 40,000 feet and posed a reasonable threat to the safety of civilian flight. Out of an abundance of caution and at the recommendation of the Pentagon, President Biden ordered the military to down the object, and they did. And it came inside our territorial waters. Those waters right now are frozen, but inside territorial airspace and over territorial waters. Fighter aircraft assigned to U.S. Northern Command took down the object within the last hour. Okay?
Can I just follow up, John, and thank you for that. That's really helpful.
Thank you. When I hear news, I just get very excited.
Fancy that.
Yes. So can we just go back for a moment? So another aircraft of some sort, airship, balloon, something was shot down today. Who owns it? What were the circumstances? Was the president directly involved in ordering this? And is wreckage being recovered?
Well, Kate. So I'm going to try. Remind me if I forget something.
Okay.
Yes, the president absolutely was involved in this decision. He ordered it at the recommendation of Pentagon leaders. He wanted it taken down, and they did that. They did it using fighter aircraft assigned to U.S. Northern Command. The Pentagon will have more to say about the details of this later on this afternoon. It's only just within the last hour. We're calling this an object because that's the best description we have right now. We do not know who owns it, whether it's state-owned or corporate-owned or privately owned. We just don't know. We don't know. As I said, state-owned. We don't know if it's state-owned, and we don't understand the full purpose. We don't have any information that would confirm a stated purpose for this object. We do expect to be able to recover the debris. Since it fell not only within our territorial space, but on what we believe is frozen water, so a recovery effort will be made, and we're hopeful that it'll be successful, and then we can learn a little bit more about it.
Was its appearance like the Chinese aircraft?
No, it was much smaller than the spy balloon that we took down last Saturday. The way it was described to me was roughly the size of a small car, as opposed to a payload that was like 2 or 3 buses size, right? So much smaller, and not of the same, no significant payload, if you will.
And lastly, is it now the policy of the United States that if unidentified aircraft are over U.S. territory, that it is likely the president will choose to shoot it
The
down?
president will always act in the best interest of our national security and in the safety and security of the American people.
Jackie, we're going to get
Thank you, guys. John, so the Pentagon ordered this new object be taken down over Alaska.
The president ordered it.
The president ordered it. So is it a fair takeaway then that the Pentagon regrets not taking down the first balloon before it crossed the entire U.S.?
Well, I'm not going to speak for the Pentagon. I can tell you that the president doesn't regret the way that we handled the first balloon. That time first of all, apples and oranges here in terms of size. As I said, this was size of a small car, and it was over a very sparsely populated area, but also more critically it was over water space when we ordered this down, as we did the last one, but a completely different size. The debris field for this we expect to be much smaller than would have been for the other one. That's difference one. Difference two. We knew for a fact that the PRC balloon that we shot down last week was in fact a surveillance asset and capable of surveillance over sensitive military sites, and that it had self-propulsion and maneuver capabilities. There's no indication that this one did. The other one, the first one, was able to maneuver and loiter, slow down, speed up. It was very purposeful, that flight path inside the jet stream.
That would suggest that maybe we should
And-
take it out over Alaska too, though.
Well, look, the Pentagon's already spoken to this question about whether or not they should have or could have shot it down over Alaska airspace. I would refer you to, there was 2 hours and hours of testimony yesterday on that.
On the communications, though, we still don't know, and correct me if I'm wrong, we don't know what intelligence or communications could have been collected or what devices they were targeting, as I understand it. So that being said, how can the president say it was not a major breach if we don't know that?
What we do know is we knew the basic flight path of this thing, and we were able to take steps at sensitive military sites that we believed would be along the flight path to significantly curtail any intelligence ability that the Chinese could get from the balloon. Certainly curtail anything that would be above and beyond what they normally try to collect through other means.
Go ahead, Zeke, and then we'll get around.
Thanks, John. Was this latest object that was shot down within the last hour, was that detected based upon any information gleaned from the monitoring of the last balloon over last week, in terms of what you learned about that Chinese program that informed the decision to shoot this item down?
I think I'd be careful saying that anything specific to what we've learned from that last platform. And we were able to collect some information from it while it was in flight. That was another reason why we let it traverse over land the way it did. But I would not say that information gleaned from our surveillance of that surveillance balloon provided insights that permitted this detection and track.
And as of this moment, are you convinced that you shot down, do you know what you shot down, that it wasn't just, a harmless weather balloon? That there was some motivation flying this over U.S. airspace, or is it truly?
I think we're going to try to learn more. I can tell you it was an object. It was at 40,000 feet, and the predominant concern by the president was a safety of flight issue at that altitude. Remember the one that we shot down last Saturday? It was at 65,000+ feet. So no threat to civilian aircraft. This one at 40,000 feet could have posed a threat to civilian aircraft, and it did not appear to have the maneuverable capability that the other one did. So, virtually at the whim of the wind.
Thank you, Crane. So just thank you, Kirby. So to follow up on what you just said about civilian aircraft, is that what you meant initially when you said there was a reasonable threat to shoot it down?
Yes, my exact words were reasonable threat to the safety of civilian flight.
Okay, and given what you said earlier about intent with regard to the Chinese spy balloon, does the U.S. give any credence to the Chinese argument that the balloon accidentally veered off course and ended up where it did?
You're talking about the one from last week?
Yeah.
Say that again. Was it?
Does the U.S. give any credence to the Chinese argument that this thing accidentally veered off course and ended up where it did?
No.
So, was it targeting specific places? Was it targeting military sites?
What we know is that the flight path it executed took it over sensitive military sites. What we also know is that it could maneuver, that it had propulsion capability and steerage capability, and could slow down, speed up, and that it was on a path to transit over sensitive military sites.
Thank you.
Thanks. Admiral Kirby, on the latest object, you said it did not appear to have the maneuverability capabilities that the Chinese spy balloon have. Did it have any maneuverability, or was it flying on its own?
At this time, all I can tell you is it did not appear to have the ability to independently maneuver. We'll attempt recovery, and we'll see what we can learn more from.
And then just one more on the Chinese spy balloon. We're reporting that the U.S. is about to impose export controls on Chinese companies that are believed to have been involved in that balloon surveillance program. Can you confirm that and say when the administration might impose those export controls?
I'm not in a position to confirm those reports right now, and I'd refer you to the Department of Treasury.
Thank you, Admiral. I believe you said this was shot down, or at least it landed in the waters or the frozen waters off the coast of Alaska, correct?
That is our initial assessment.
So is the policy still, considering the first one was shot down off the East Coast and this high-altitude object was shot down off the West Coast, is the policy at this point in time you could shoot it down if it's over a body of water?
I wouldn't derive from these two incidents some sort of policy that comes out of it. The president will always act in the best interest of the American people and international security. Last week, we were talking about a surveillance asset that was purposely flown over the continental United States. In the case today, we're talking about an object. Again, we don't know a lot about it, but that at its altitude represented a potential threat to the safety of flying customers, civil air traffic.
Based on your broad and deep experience, who do you think might own or have flown this thing in the air?
I have no idea.
Good, Mary.
You know, you don't know who owns it or who's flown it, but has anyone from the administration reached out to the Chinese to see whether they will claim this new object?
I know of no outreach this afternoon to the Chinese government about this.
The State Department over the weekend, or the last few days, I'm losing track of days, but since the first spy balloon, confirmed that they think that these Chinese spy balloons have gone over 40 countries. Considering that fact and this new development today, what's next on a larger diplomatic front? The U.S. talking with allies about how to police the skies, about how to bring this to the UN to figure out what to do?
We are talking to dozens of nations who we know have been overflown by Chinese surveillance balloons, part of this program that the Chinese have invested in, to share with them the context and information that we've learned by the forensics we've done since we came in office about this particular program. And I would remind you that we briefed Congress in a classified setting back in August about this. This is not something we haven't been trying to learn more about. We've been aware of it and trying to glean more information from it. And this, we expect that the recovery of the debris from the balloon we shot down on last Saturday, will help us gain even more information. But we are in the active conversations with many of these countries who we know have been overflown.
Yeah, where specifically in Alaska was the high altitude object shot down?
So the Pentagon will be talking more about this a little bit later. They'll probably have more detail for you. But the general area would be just off the very, very northeastern part of Alaska, right near the Alaska-Canada border.
So near the Arctic Ocean?
Well, yeah. In fact, that's where it went down on that northern side of Alaska, near the Canadian border, on water that is frozen in the yes.
It was never over land.
No, it was. It was.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it was shot down within the last hour. When did you said when did the U.S. first get intelligence that it existed?
The knowledge about the balloon and the track first came to our attention last evening.
Okay. What time thereabouts?
I don't have an exact time on the clock for you. It was last evening.
Well, have you ruled out, or not ruled out, but you have not determined that it was surveillance in nature, correct?
We haven't ruled anything in or out. And that's why we're calling this thing an object. And
you just called it a balloon. You misspoke there.
I'm sorry. It's not a, yes, I'm sorry. You guys have...
You can't say it's a balloon either.
You guys have me with balloon on the brain right now. This was an object. Let me just clarify, I'm not classifying it as a balloon right now. It's an object. We're still trying to learn more from it. That it landed on water that is frozen could help us assist, make it easier for us to try to recover some of the debris. U.S. Northern Command is examining what the possibilities for that are.
Finally, you said you have no knowledge of any outreach to the Chinese yet from the administration. Are there plans to reach out and ask whether they...
I know of no plans to reach out to the Chinese specifically on this. I want to stress again, we don't know what entity owns this object. There's no indication that it's from a nation or an institution or an individual. We just don't know.
It's a foreign entity, that's right.
We don't know who owns this object.
Thank you. Thanks. Are you tracking any other similar objects right now at this time?
I'm not aware of any other tracks.
And then also, I know that you said that this was due to a civilian aircraft threat, but why not wait till it's over warmer water where you could more easily recover
It wasn't heading over warmer water. It was heading over the Arctic. It's not very warm.
Thank you, Karine, and thank you, Admiral. One question on today's incident and then one on a separate subject, if I may. Given how little was known about this object at the time that our forces shot it down, is it safe to say that when the President ordered that it be shot down, he did not know whether it was a manned or unmanned object?
We were able to get some fighter aircraft up and around it before the order to shoot it down, and the pilot's assessment was that this was not manned.
Thank you, Karine. Admiral, over here, I wanted to ask you two questions.
I need to watch for her hands.
One on the shoot down that you just described, on the incident that happened in the past hour. I wanted to know, is there any line of communication that you can describe that has been ongoing over the course of the past 2 weeks on the diplomatic side of things? I know that the Defense Secretary says that his call to his counterpart was not returned from China. But on the diplomatic side of things, are there lines of communication between the U.S. and China right now?
Well, certainly. Look, we have an embassy in Beijing. Diplomatic discussions routinely happen with Beijing. So, of course, the diplomatic channels remain open. Sadly, the military ones do not appear to be open right now. Secretary Austin made a good faith effort to reach out to his counterpart and was rebuffed. And that's unfortunate, particularly when at times like this, you want to keep as open as you can the lines of communication. And the President's committed to that.
Thank you, Admiral. Thank you, Corinne. Isn't there a concern that these objects, the object and the balloon, were both discovered when they're already flying over U.S. airspace? Shouldn't they be detected before they enter the U.S.?
I think we're going to continue to learn a lot about how these things are or can be detected in a better way. You heard the NORTHCOM commander talk about certain gaps that he felt he had in his domain awareness. So from this incident last week, we'll certainly learn about the capabilities of that surveillance asset, but we also expect to learn more about our own processes and our own systems for detection and tracking. I don't want to get into exactly how this one was detected, but I can assure you that that we're going to continue to try to improve our own knowledge base with respect to these systems.
Just one more quick question on the object. Can you say anything about the proximity of it and its flight path to the sensitive oil fields near Prudhoe Bay? And was there any threat at all at any point to that equipment in that region of Alaska?
I'd refer you to the Pentagon for more detail about the track. Again, this just all happened within the last hour, so I don't know what the proximity was to oil fields. And your second question was?
Oh, it was just about the sensitivity, the oil fields, basically.
Well, again, I mean, we just don't know what this object was. We don't, it'd be difficult for me to point to a threat or a specific concern such as oil fields when we don't really understand what this object was doing.
Thank you, Carolina. Thank you, John. I have two questions. China is claiming ownership of the balloon, and China said that they will take legal actions. Will you send the balloon back to the China?
There are no plans to send the debris that we are recovering back to China. We're going to pull it up off the bottom of the ocean, and we're going to learn more about this capability.
Thanks, John. Just a few more on the object. You said it was discovered last night. Was it flying consistently at an altitude of roughly 40,000 feet that entire time?
Roughly, yes.
Were there any sightings that you're aware of by airmen, civilian
No,
aircraft
sir.
operators? No.
No, sir.
And can you, just to nail it down, can you tell us when the president gave the order to shoot it down?
Gave the order to shoot it down this morning.
Again, just keep following up on the same topic. The speed with which you guys, with which the president apparently decided to shoot it down, having just discovered the first intelligence of it last night, and by the morning he's saying shoot it down. Was there something specific, more specific about the threat than just generally being in the airspace at which, the height at which?
The predominant reason driving the president's decision was the safety of flight issue.
No, I understand it was, but there had, I mean, that's a really big area up there. It's not all that many planes. It's not like it was in the middle of the Northeast Corridor or something. Is there no way in which you guys could have said, hey, airplanes, like, steer clear of this area until we know better what this thing is, because we're, I mean, in other words, was there some reason why?
The president wasn't willing to take that kind of a risk in time, because this thing did not appear to be self-maneuvering, and therefore at the mercy of prevailing winds. It was much less predictable, and so the president just wasn't willing to take that risk.
Thank you. You mentioned that there were fighter aircraft who were able to determine that it likely was not manned. Were those fighter aircraft able to determine anything else about it from up close that they wouldn't be able to find out otherwise?
They worked really hard to try to get as much information as they could about this object. Given its size, which was much smaller, and the capabilities on the fighter aircraft themselves, the speed at which they were flying, it was difficult for the pilots to glean a whole lot of information. Not like we were able to glean off the balloon, not the other balloon, the balloon. Thank you, Michael. Because we also had several days to track that. So there was a limit to how much they could divine. Also, it was detected at night, and so the first engagement by fighter aircraft late last night was, again, difficult for them. It was a small object, and these are fighter aircraft flying at pretty high speed, and the ability to glean a lot of information was limited, which is why they did another flight earlier this morning to see if we could get more. I mean, they did the best they could, but again, the speed and the conditions up there, as well as the size of the object, made it a little bit more difficult.
Just to confirm, there was a flight last night to do some surveillance.
Yes. That's right. There was at least two that I know of. Again, the Pentagon will probably have more detail, but at least two. There was last night, a couple of fighter aircraft surveilled it, tried to glean as much information as we could about what it was, so we had a sense. And then another such flight today, and of course that flight ended up, in a shoot down.
Sorry, just one more question.
Running out of time.
From the White House podium, do you have a message for whoever is responsible for this aircraft, or anyone who may have similar aircraft, about what the White House response should be?
I'd rather than sending some sort of message in that way, I would just tell you that we're going to remain vigilant about our airspace. We're going to remain vigilant about the skies over the United States. And as I said earlier, the president takes his obligations to protect our national security interests and those of and the safety and security of the American people is paramount. And he's always going to decide and act in a way that is commensurate with that duty. That's the real takeaway here.
I wanted to follow up on a question I asked you in September. In light of the Chinese spy balloon incident, does this administration consider Chinese land purchases near U.S. military bases a national security threat?
We are always concerned about potential foreign collection near or around our military sites. And you're right, last week is a good example of that. We take that seriously, whether that's terrestrial related or whether it's from the air. And I think I'll just leave it at that.
Would you be working perhaps with Congress to put in place legislation to prevent that kind of
We are
ownership?
always willing to work with Congress to address our national security interests and threats as best we can.
Thanks, Corinne. Thanks, Admiral. So,
all right, thank you, Corinne. Admiral, just real quick, is there a timeline for recovery of this object?
You'd have to talk to the Pentagon. I don't know. Again, guys, this just happened within the last hour and a half, and they're still assessing where this thing landed and the degree to which they can get to it.
Just a quick one on the timeline. Was the president briefed on the object last night when the track first came to the administration's attention?
He was. He was as soon as the Pentagon had enough information to provide him, they did that. Thanks, guys. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Thanks, Admiral. Okay, now for the boring part of the briefing.